Barron Trump, the towering enigma of the Trump dynasty, had built a gaming empire so vast, so dazzling, that it captivated millions, until a Zelensky-worshipping fanatic unleashed the most jaw-dropping, gut-wrenching disruption imaginable. It was a moment so wild, so hilariously unhinged, that it turned the internet into a screaming circus and left the world clutching its collective chest. Something utterly astonishing happened, something that flipped Barron's pixel-perfect life into chaos and sparked a controversy so massive it could ignite wars of its own. This is the tale of a digital dynasty's greatest triumph colliding with a rebel's fiery crusade. And trust me, you'll be begging to know what insanity comes next. Barron Trump had carved out a kingdom in the chaotic realm of online gaming, a domain where his name wasn't just a headline but a legend etched in neon lights. At 18, he stood an imposing 6'7", his lanky frame draped in a black hoodie emblazoned with his gaming tag, Barron T, as he sat enthroned in a Miami penthouse-stern streaming fortress. The room pulsed with energy. 3 curved monitors bathed the space in a kaleidoscope of colors, their screens flickering with the frenetic action of Apex Legends, his game of choice. Mechanical keyboards clacked beneath his nimble fingers, each tap a drumbeat in the symphony of his dominance, while RGB lights danced across the walls, casting a glow on shelves lined with trophies, gleaming testaments to his victories in tournaments past. The air hummed with the low whir of cooling fans, the scent of energy drinks mingling with the faint tang of salt drifting through an open window, a nod to the ocean sprawling beyond the glass. Barron's streams were a global phenomenon, pulling in millions of viewers who worshipped his every move. His follower count dwarfed that of pop stars and athletes, his chat a torrent of emojis and praise, flashing hearts, fire symbols and cries of awe as he racked up kills with surgical precision. He'd mastered the art of the battle royale, his strategies a blend of instinct and intellect, predicting enemy movements like a chess grandmaster in a war zone. Beyond the gameplay, it was his presence that hooked them, cool, unflappable, a young man who let his skills speak where words rarely ventured. He offered glimpses of his life sparingly, a smirk at a fan's joke, a nod to his custom-rigged specs, but never touched the third rail of his family's political legacy, keeping his empire a sanctuary of pixels and adrenaline. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. This day was no ordinary stream, though. Barron was poised to cement his legend in the Apex Legends Global Showdown, a tournament billed as the ultimate test of skill, with a prize pool that glittered in the 7 figures. His setup was flawless, fiber-optic internet purring at peak speed, a team of tech wizards hovering in the background, tweaking audio levels and camera angles. The penthouse buzzed with controlled chaos. A handler adjusted a ring light to catch the sharp angles of Barron's face. Another synced his stream overlay with sponsor logos, energy drinks, gaming gear, a crypto exchange flashing in bold neon. Outside, the Miami skyline shimmered in the late afternoon sun, palm trees swaying as if bowing to the spectacle unfolding within. Far from this glittering tower, in a cramped basement apartment in a Rust Belt American city, another figure simmered in the glow of a single, flickering monitor. Known online as Zelensky's Blade, he was a 30-something loner, his wiry frame hunched over a desk littered with empty coffee cups, crumpled papers, and a Ukrainian flag pinned crookedly to the wall. His real name was lost to the digital ether, buried beneath a persona forged in the crucible of war thousands of miles away. His eyes, bloodshot from sleepless nights, darted across forums and X-feeds, soaking in every scrap of news about Ukraine's struggle. The room reeked of stale air and obsession, the only sound the relentless tap of his fingers on a worn keyboard as he typed manifestos no one read, his words a howl into the void about sacrifice, resistance, and the world's apathy. Zelensky's Blade had stumbled into Barron's streams months earlier, drawn by morbid curiosity about the Trump scion's virtual fame. At first, it was a distraction, a break from the endless scroll of war footage. But the more he watched, the more his fascination curdled into rage. Barron's streams were a glittering escape, a fantasy of victory and excess, while Ukraine bled under bombardment. To Blade, Barron's silence was deafening, a sin of omission from a kid with a megaphone bigger than most nations. He saw privilege in every pixel, every casual laugh Barron let slip, every sponsored deal that fattened his coffers while cities crumbled overseas. The resentment festered, a slow burn that ignited into a mission. Barron Trump would pay for his indifference, and the world would see it happen. In the basement, Blade's plan took shape with the precision of a soldier prepping for battle. He taught himself the dark arts of the internet: phishing, packet sniffing, exploits traded in shadowy Discord servers. His target was Barron's stream, that gleaming beacon of ego, and the showdown was the perfect stage. He gathered his weapons, a trove of war footage, shattered buildings, weeping families, Zelensky's steely gaze, stitched into a video loop designed to shock. He scripted a message, a blistering denunciation of Barron's silence, typed in jagged all caps on a cracked laptop screen. His hands shook as he tested his tools, breaching dummy streams to perfect the timing, the intrusion seamless as a knife through silk. This wasn't just sabotage, it was a reckoning, a chance to hijack Barron's empire and scream Ukraine's pain into the void. Back in Miami, Barron leaned back in his chair, the tournament countdown ticking on-screen, 10 minutes until go time. His pulse quickened, not from fear but from the thrill of the hunt, the promise of another crown to add to his collection. The chat exploded with hype, a digital roar that vibrated through the room, his team feeding off the energy as they fine-tuned the broadcast. The penthouse windows framed a sunset painting the sky in fiery hues, a backdrop fit for a king about to claim his throne. Barron cracked his knuckles, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, oblivious to the storm brewing in a basement far away. In that dim, cluttered hole, Zelensky's blade stared at his screen, a mirror of Barron's countdown ticking in sinister sync. His finger hovered over the enter key, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple, his breath shallow with anticipation. The Ukrainian flag on the wall seemed to pulse in the monitor's glow, a silent witness to the chaos he was about to unleash. Barron's stream was a fortress, but Blade had found the cracks, and as the showdown loomed, he prepared to tear it wide open, setting the stage for a clash that would shake the foundations of a digital dynasty and ignite a firestorm no one could douse. The penthouse was a tomb of silence now, the once vibrant hum of machinery replaced by the faint buzz of cooling fans and the distant thrum of Miami's nightlife filtering through the glass. Barron Trump stood motionless at the window, his reflection a ghostly silhouette against the neon sprawl below. The city glittered like a jewel, oblivious to the war that had just erupted in his digital domain. His phone lay abandoned on the desk, its screen a relentless strobe of notifications, sponsors demanding explanations, fans pleading for clarity, critics sharpening their knives. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of a million eyes now fixed on him, waiting for the prince of gaming to reclaim his throne or crumble beneath the assault. In the basement, Zelensky's blade hunched over his monitor, the glow casting harsh shadows across his gaunt face. The stream was dead, Barron's feed severed like a guillotine's drop, but the internet was alive with the echoes of his attack. Screenshots of his manifesto raced across platforms, each retweet a flare illuminating the darkness he'd clawed open. His heart pounded, a drumbeat of triumph laced with hunger. He'd pierced the armor of Barron's empire, but the silence from Miami gnawed at him. He needed more, a reaction, a crack in the facade. His fingers darted to a second monitor, pulling up encrypted forums where his allies waited, their avatars a legion of ghosts ready to amplify his next strike. The Ukrainian flag on his wall hung still now, a silent sentinel witnessing his descent into obsession. Back in the penthouse, Barron's mind churned, a storm of strategy and instinct. The hack wasn't just a disruption, it was a declaration, a gauntlet thrown at his feet by a faceless zealot who dared to drag war into his world. He could feel the heat of frustration rising, a flicker of anger at the audacity, but he crushed it beneath the cool steel of his resolve. He'd built this empire from nothing, hours of grinding, outsmarting rivals, turning a controller into a scepter, and he'd be damned if some basement crusader tore it down. His eyes flicked to the dark monitors, then back to the city, a plan crystallizing in the chaos. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his team parting like water before him. The lead tech, sweat beading on his brow, fingers still trembling from the failed countermeasures, looked up, expectant. Barron didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence commanded, his silence a louder order than any shout. He leaned over the main console, his shadow swallowing the screen as he pulled up the streams back in data. The numbers told a story. Viewership had tripled in the hack's wake, the crash drawing more eyes than any victory ever had. A grim smile tugged at his lips. Blade had lit a fire, but Barron would stoke it into something greater. The chat logs mirrored on a secondary screen were a war zone of their own. Loyalists rallied with ferocity. Barron's too big to fall. This hack's a joke, he'll be back stronger. But dissenters thrived in the cracks, their words venomous. Rich kid can't handle real problems, Ukraine's right, he's just a spoiled gamer. The split was electric, a current Barron could harness if he played it right. He straightened, his mind racing through options. Go silent and let the storm pass, or strike back with a move so bold it would redefine the narrative. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a lesson from years past. Never let them see you bleed. Turn their weapons into yours. Outside, the internet burned brighter. X was a maelstrom of hashtags and hot takes. Barron hacked climbing global trends alongside Zelensky-Blade, a name the zealot hadn't claimed but the masses had bestowed. Newsrooms churned out articles, their tone a mix of shock and glee. Gaming titan Barron Trump faces Ukraine war protest in livestream meltdown, and Trump legacy tested as Sun's stream becomes political battlefield. Clips of the war footage looped on every platform. Zelensky's face a haunting overlay on Barron's fallen empire. Sponsors hesitated, their logos still tied to the wreckage, their PR teams drafting statements to distance or double down. In the basement, Blade's eyes gleamed as he scrolled through the fallout. His message had metastasized, splintering into 1,000 debates. Some cursed him as a terrorist, others hailed him as a martyr. The attention was intoxicating, but Barron's blackout gnawed at his victory. He needed the prince to fight, to step into the ring he'd bloodied. His hands moved to his keyboard, drafting a second wave, a deeper hack, a louder scream, when a new alert pinged. A whisper from his network. Barron's team was moving, their digital footprints faint but deliberate. Blade froze, his pulse spiking. The game was shifting. In Miami, Barron turned from the console, his decision made. He wouldn't just restart the stream, he'd weaponize the chaos. He gestured to his team, a single nod igniting a flurry of action. Cameras repositioned, servers rebooted, a new overlay designed in real time. The penthouse thrummed back to life, the RGB lights flaring like war drums. He'd go live again, not with Apex Legends, but with a broadcast of his own. A direct address, raw and unfiltered, to the millions now watching. He'd face Blade's fire head-on, turn the zealot's crusade into his own platform, and show the world why his empire wouldn't bend. The clock ticked toward midnight, the city outside a restless sea of lights. In the basement, Blade refreshed his screen, sensing the tremor of something coming. In the penthouse, Barron adjusted his headset, his reflection in the monitor a portrait of defiance. The stream's countdown flickered to life. 10:98. The world held its breath, teetering on the edge of the next explosion. The Miami night pulsed with electric tension, the skyline a jagged silhouette against the humid dark, as Barron Trump's stream burned through the hours. The penthouse glowed atop its tower, a fortress of light and sound, the RGB hues bleeding into the glass walls like a war banner unfurled. Inside, Barron's fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, each click a gunshot in the silence of his muted mic. his screen a battlefield where Apex legends unfolded in brutal clarity. His stats climbed, 20 kills, 30, 40, each elimination a brick in the wall he rebuilt around his empire. The chat scrolled at hyperspeed, a flood of fire emojis, crown icons, and fervent declarations. King Barron, unbreakable. They can't touch him. His team flanked him, their screens aglow with analytics, tracking the tide of viewers swelling past 10 million, a number that dwarfed even his pre-hack peak. Far below the penthouse's gleam, in a basement choked with stale air and desperation, Zelensky's blade sat motionless, the Ukrainian flag behind him a wilted relic of his unraveling crusade. The deepfakes, his last reckless salvo, had backfired spectacularly. Debunked by Barron's team with forensic precision, the crude edits exposed as pixelated lies, they'd only fueled the prince's legend. Blade's burner accounts were suspended, his digital footprint swept away by moderators and algorithms, leaving him a ghost in his own war. His monitor cast a sickly pallor over his face, the stream's reflection mocking him with Barron's unbroken stride. The zealot's hands hovered over his keyboard, trembling not with purpose but with the hollow ache of defeat. Barron sensed the shift, the air in the penthouse crackling with it. He leaned back in his chair, his towering frame a silhouette against the cityscape, and unmuted his mic. His voice cut through the stream, deep and deliberate, a blade honed by hours of silent calculation. He didn't gloat, triumph was beneath him now, but spoke of legacy, of empires that endured beyond the reach of petty vengeance. The chat erupted anew, donations pouring in like tribute, their totals flashing in the overlay. $50,000, $100,000, a river of loyalty swelling his coffers. Sponsors seized the moment, their ads seamless in the broadcast, their faith in Barron's brand cemented by his refusal to bend. In the basement, Blade's world shrank to the sound of that voice. Each word was a lash, stripping away the delusions he'd clung to, the noble hacker, the righteous avenger. His eyes flicked to the USB drive, now useless, its contents a spent cartridge in a gun that had misfired. He dreamed of Barron's fall, of the prince's empire crumbling into ash, but the screen told a different story. Barron's kills ticked upward, his audience grew, his narrative unshaken. Blade's fingers curled into fists, nails biting into his palms, a scream trapped in his throat. He poured everything into this fight, his skills, his rage, his fractured ideals, and it had amounted to nothing but a footnote in Barron's ascent. The stream's momentum carried into the early hours, Barron's gameplay a relentless display of dominance. His team worked in silent harmony, pushing clips to X, amplifying his reach. The hashtag #BarronReborn climbed global trends, while Zelensky Blade sank into obscurity, drowned by memes mocking the zealot's failure. Pundits weighed in, their takes a mix of grudging respect and breathless hype. Barron wasn't just a streamer now. He was a phenomenon, a symbol of defiance forged in the crucible of betrayal. The deepfakes, once a threat, became his armor, proof of his enemies' desperation. Blade couldn't watch anymore. He shoved his chair back, the screech of metal on concrete a jarring echo in the basement's gloom. His chest heaved, his breath ragged as he tore the flag from the wall, its fabric crumpling in his hands. The cause he'd claimed, the war, the struggle, the righteousness, felt distant now, tainted by his obsession with a prince who'd never even known his name. He stumbled to the corner, sinking to the floor, the USB drive clattering beside him. The stream played on, Barron's voice a faint hum through his discarded headphones, a requiem for the zealot's collapse. Above, Barron's penthouse thrummed with victory. The stream neared its end, the viewer count a staggering testament to his gambit's success. He leaned into the camera, his blue eyes icy with resolve, and delivered his final words of the night, not a farewell but a promise. The empire would grow, he vowed, its roots sinking deeper with every attack it weathered. He signed off, the screen fading to black, but the penthouse didn't quiet. His team erupted into motion, planning the next move, their faith in him unshakable. Barron stood at the window, the city sprawling beneath him, its lights a mirror to the fire in his chest. He'd turned Blade's assault into his coronation, but he knew the war wasn't over, only this battle. In the basement, silence reigned. Blade stared at the crumpled flag, its colors muted in the dark, and felt the weight of his descent. He'd sought to wreck a prince, to topple an empire, but all he'd done was crown a king. The stream was over, but its echoes lingered, a haunting reminder of the abyss he'd leapt into and the light he'd never touch again. The arena's pulse lingered in the air, a fatting echo of triumph and chaos, as Barron Trump stepped off the stage. His boots hit the polished floor with a steady rhythm, each step a quiet declaration of his unbroken reign. The neon glow of the exit tunnel swallowed his towering silhouette, the black Barron hoodie a stark contrast against the flickering lights. Behind him, the crowd's roar softened into a hum, their chants dissolving into the buzz of post-game analysis and the clatter of folding chairs. The giant screens replayed his final kill in a loop, his character standing victorious amidst the virtual wreckage, a digital colossus born from the fans' sabotage. The air still crackled with the residue of adrenaline, the scent of burnt pyrotechnics clinging to the atmosphere like a victor's perfume. Outside, Miami's night unfurled in a sprawl of heat and humidity, the city's skyline a jagged crown of glass and steel. Barron emerged into a throng of fans and paparazzi, their phones flashing like a swarm of fireflies. His security detail, hulking figures in dark suits, formed a wall around him, their movements sharp and synchronized as they carved a path to the waiting SUV. The vehicle's engine growled to life, its tinted windows reflecting the chaos it left behind. Barron slid into the back seat, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, scanning the crowd as if sensing the shadow of the zealot still lurking in the world he ruled. The door slammed shut, a final barrier between him and the night, and the SUV peeled away, tires hissing against the asphalt. You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going. Meanwhile, in the arena's bowels, Zelensky's blade faced his reckoning. The service corridor had become a cage, its concrete walls closing in as security pinned him to the ground. His backpack lay spilled beside him, its contents, laptop, cables, the USB drive, scattered like the relics of a failed crusade. His wrists burned under the bite of handcuffs, the metal cold and unyielding, while his mask dangled uselessly around his neck, exposing a face carved by exhaustion and defiance. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, darted to the flickering security monitors, where Barron's exit played out in grainy black and white. The prince was untouchable, a specter slipping through the night, while Blade was left to choke on the dust of his own collapse. The guards hauled him upright, their grips iron-tight, and marched him through the labyrinth of back hallways. The air grew stale, heavy with the tang of rust and desperation, as they passed utility closets and humming generators. His boots dragged, leaving faint scuff marks on the floor, a trail of his unraveling resolve. The Ukrainian flag patch on his sleeve caught on a jagged edge of the wall, tearing slightly, a small, silent wound mirroring the one in his chest. His mind raced, replaying the moment his screens had betrayed him, the crowd's cheers twisting his manifesto into a hymn for Barron's glory. The weight of it pressed down, a suffocating shroud that smothered the fire he'd once carried. Outside, the story metastasized. News vans clustered around the arena like vultures, their satellite dishes piercing the sky, while reporters jostled for angles on the night's drama. Social media ignited, a battlefield of hashtags and hot takes, Barron unbroken trending alongside clips of his gameplay, the Warzone map now a viral icon. The donations from his stream spiked again, the ticker climbing past 7 figures as fans poured their awe into his empire. Gaming forums buzzed with theories. Some hailed the hack as a stroke of genius, a real-time test Barron had aced. Others decried it as a cheap stunt, a desecration of the sport. Blade's message, the war footage and red-lettered accusations, became a footnote, drowned by the spectacle of Barron's defiance. Back in the SUV, Barron leaned against the leather seat, the city blurring past in streaks of light. His phone rested in his hand, its screen dark. He hadn't checked the flood of notifications, hadn't needed to. The weight of the trophy, still warm from the stage, sat beside him, its edges glinting in the passing streetlights. His fingers traced its surface absently, a rare moment of stillness in a life built on motion. The chaos of the night hadn't shaken him. It had sharpened him, honed the edge of a blade he'd wielded since he first gripped a controller. Miami's pulse thrummed outside, a rhythm he'd mastered long ago, and he let it carry him back to the penthouse where his empire waited. For Blade, the journey was less forgiving. The security team handed him off to local police, their flashlights cutting through the dark as they shoved him into a cruiser. The door slammed with a hollow clang, the sound reverberating in his skull. The car's interior reeked of stale coffee and vinyl, its seats worn smooth by countless others who'd fallen before him. Through the window, he caught glimpses of the arena receding, its lights fading into the distance like a dream he couldn't reclaim. His hands, still cuffed, clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms as the reality sank in. He'd gambled everything and lost, his war against Barron ending not in victory but in chains. The cruiser rolled through Miami streets, weaving past neon-lit clubs and palm-lined boulevards, toward a precinct where Blade's fate would be sealed. His mind churned, a storm of rage and regret, but beneath it, a flicker of something new, clarity perhaps, or the ghost of surrender. He'd sought to topple a prince, to drag Barron into the mud of his own obsession, but all he'd done was build him higher. The screens, the game, the crowd, they'd all turned against him, allies in a war he couldn't win. As the car stopped, the precinct's harsh fluorescent glow spilling through the window, Blade's shoulders slumped, the fight leaching out of him like blood from a wound. Barron, now atop his penthouse perch, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, Miami sprawling below like a conquered kingdom. The city's lights danced across his face, illuminating the faint lines of a man who'd faced chaos and emerged unscathed. His gaming rig hummed softly in the corner, a sentinel of his dominion, while the trophy gleamed on a shelf, a silent witness to the night's battle. He shed the hoodie, letting it fall to the floor, and stretched his frame, muscles flexing under a simple black shirt. The world outside debated his silence, his skill, his empire. But up here in the stillness, he was beyond it all, a prince gazing over a realm that bent to his will. The night closed in, heavy and hot, but the story wasn't finished. Blade's arrest was a spark, not an end, and the embers of his obsession smoldered still. Barron's victory had cemented his legend, but legends draw challengers, and the shadows held whispers of what was to come. For now, the prince rested, his empire intact, while the zealot faced the dawn in chains, two forces locked in a dance that fate had yet to resolve. The Miami sun hung heavy in the sky, its heat pressing against the penthouse windows like an uninvited guest. Inside, Barron Trump's digital war room pulsed with a strange calm, the frenetic energy of the night's victory settling into a low hum. The screens still glowed, their data streams now a steady rhythm rather than a chaotic flood, tracking the fallout of his counterstrike. His team lingered in the background, their exhaustion masked by the glow of triumph, their eyes darting to Barron as if awaiting his next command. He stood motionless, his towering silhouette framed against the glass, the city sprawling below like a chessboard he'd just conquered. But the weight of the wind sat uneasily on his shoulders, a quiet tension coiling beneath his calm exterior. Blade was down, his digital empire in ruins, yet Barron knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. Far below, in the dank confines of Blade's basement, the air was thick with despair. The cracked monitor flickered weakly, its light casting jagged shadows across the room, illuminating the Ukrainian flag now slumped in a heap on the floor. Blade sat hunched over his desk, his hands limp, his eyes fixed on the void where his crusade had once burned bright. Barron's stream had ended hours ago, but its echo lingered, each dissected manifesto and exposed failure replaying in Blade's mind like a looped nightmare. His phone lay silent, its screen dark. No more notifications, no more allies, just the hollow shell of a movement that had collapsed under the prince's unrelenting precision. The basement felt like a tomb, the walls closing in, Yet within him something stirred, a faint pulse of defiance, too stubborn to die. In the penthouse, Barron's mind churned, piecing together the next move. He turned Blade's attack into a spectacle of dominance, flipping the script with a ruthlessness that had stunned even his own team. The USB drive still sat plugged into his rig, its contents a digital guillotine that had severed Blade's credibility. But the victory felt incomplete, a single battle in a war whose edges he couldn't fully see. He crossed to the main console, his fingers brushing the keys as he pulled up a new overlay, a heat map of online chatter, pooling red where Blade's influence had once thrived. The dots were fading, scattering like ash, but a few lingered, stubborn clusters of unrest that refused to dissipate. Barron's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about one fanatic. It was a symptom, a ripple of something larger he'd unwittingly tapped into. The team watched as Barron zoomed in on the map, his focus narrowing to a single point, a forum thread buried deep in the dark web, its posts alive with cryptic mentions of Blade's martyrdom. His team had missed it in the initial sweep, but Barron's instincts, honed by years of gaming and strategy, caught the scent of danger. He didn't need to speak. A glance at his lead coder sent the man scrambling to dig deeper, fingers flying across the keyboard. The screen filled with raw data, usernames, timestamps, fragments of a plan taking shape. Blade's defeat hadn't silenced his cause. It had ignited it, turning him into a ghost story for the zealots who still believed. Barron's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of a challenge reigniting. In the basement, Blade's trembling hand reached for a burner phone hidden beneath a pile of crumpled papers. His accounts were gone, his identity stripped, but this, one last lifeline, remained. His thumb hovered over the keys, hesitation warring with desperation. Barron had exposed him, humiliated him, but the prince couldn't erase the fire that had driven him this far. The Ukrainian war, Zelensky's defiance, the ideals he'd clung to, they still burned even if the world now saw them through the lens of his failure. He typed a single message, cryptic and brief, to a contact he'd kept in reserve. "The echo lives. Next move is yours." The phone buzzed once, a reply flashing across the screen. "Understood. Stand by." Blade exhaled, a flicker of hope cutting through the haze. He wasn't alone, not yet. Back in the penthouse, the coder's voice broke the silence, low and urgent. "Boss, you need to see this." Barron turned as the screen shifted, revealing an intercepted message, the same one Blade had just sent. The words stared back at him, stark and defiant, a signal that the fanatic's reach extended beyond the grave of his digital ruin. Barron's team froze, the air thickening with unease, but he remained still, his mind racing. Blade wasn't just a lone wolf. He was a spark, and something was ready to fan the flames. The heat map pulsed again, new dots flaring to life, a network awakening in the shadows. Barron's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a recognition of the game shifting beneath his feet. The war room sprang back into motion, the team rallying without a word, their screens lighting up with fresh tasks, tracing the message, mapping the new players, fortifying Barron's empire against the unseen threat. He stepped back, his gaze drifting to the Miami skyline, the sun now a blazing disk overhead. Blade's counterstrike had been crushed, his obsession laid bare, but this new ripple was different, organized, patient, dangerous. Barron's empire had weathered the storm, but the horizon darkened with the promise of a greater reckoning. He won the day, reclaimed his throne, but the cost was clarity. The fanatic's echo was no longer just Blade's, it was a chorus, and it was growing louder. In the basement, Blade set the burner phone down, his eyes drifting to the fallen flag. He didn't move to pick it up, it didn't matter anymore. The fight had outgrown him, slipping from his grasp into hands he couldn't see. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight, and stared at the ceiling, a strange peace settling over him. Barron had beaten him, broken him, but the war wasn't his to lose. It never had been. The echo would carry on, with or without him, and that was enough. The Miami day stretched on, the city oblivious to the silent clash unfolding in its shadows. Barron's war room buzzed with purpose, a fortress of code and strategy, while Blade's basement sank into stillness, a crypt for a zealot whose fire had leapt beyond his reach. The prince and the fanatic, bound by their duel, stood on opposite sides of a fault line cracking wider by the hour. Part 5 was closing, but the story wasn't. Its final act loomed, inevitable and explosive, waiting for the next move to ignite it. The Miami night pulsed with restless energy, its neon glow bleeding into a sky thick with the threat of rain. Inside Barron Trump's penthouse war room, the atmosphere crackled with purpose. Servers hummed, keyboards clacked, and screens cast an eerie light across the space. Barron stood at the heart of it all, his tall silhouette dominating the room, blue eyes locked on the sprawling digital battlefield displayed before him. The team moved with precision around him, their silence a testament to the machine he'd forged, each member synchronized in the mission to end the chaos sown by Zelensky's blade. The final piece of the puzzle glowed on the main screen, a live feed of Blade's basement, now a desolate tomb of flickering shadows and shattered resolve. Far below the city's shimmering heights, Blade slumped in his chair, the Ukrainian flag draped over his shoulders like a faded banner of a lost cause. A cracked burner phone lay abandoned on the desk, its last message, a desperate plea to his scattered followers, unanswered. His hands shook, not from fear but from the crushing weight of inevitability, as he stared into the monitor's dark surface. The echo he'd unleashed had spiraled beyond his control, but its collapse was now closing in, a tide he could no longer outrun. He sensed Barron's presence, not in the room but in the tightening noose of code and surveillance that had tracked him to this moment. The basement air grew heavy, stale, as if it too had given up on him. Back in the penthouse, Barron's fingers lingered above the keyboard, the decisive command primed and waiting. His team had unraveled the Echo's network, a sprawling, decentralized web of zealots plotting in the dark, their schemes fragile yet venomous. One keystroke could flood their shadows with light, exposing them to the world and shattering their operations in an instant. But Barron hesitated, his mind weighing the scales of annihilation against the restraint of victory. Blade was a husk, his threat gutted, yet the Echo's embers smoldered, a latent spark that could flare again if ignored. His jaw clenched, resolve hardening in the quiet of his own judgment, and with a single, deliberate motion, he pressed the key. The screens erupted in a cascade of code, a digital storm tearing through the Echo's foundations. Forums vanished into black voids, servers seized mid-breath, and encrypted channels fell silent. Across the globe, live feeds flared to life, raids unfolding in real-time, blue lights piercing through curtains, the distant howl of sirens cutting through foreign nights. The Zealots' network disintegrated, their plans reduced to ash, their defiance snuffed out by Barron's unrelenting hand. In the war room, his team watched, breathless, as the screens chronicled the fall, a monument to their leader's precision. The tension snapped, the room exhaling as the storm passed, but Barron's eyes stayed on Blade's feed, the basement's stillness a mirror to the havoc he'd wrought. In that dim underground lair, Blade felt the end before it appeared. His monitor flickered, a single line of text scrolling into view. "Your war is over, so is mine." The words burned into his vision, cold and absolute, a requiem for the struggle that had defined him. His breath hitched, a pang of something, grief, relief, or perhaps humiliation, tightening his chest. Barron hadn't crushed him with fanfare. He'd severed him with a quiet, merciless efficiency, leaving Blade to stew in the wreckage of his own obsession. The flag slid from his shoulders, crumpling to the floor in a heap of faded blue and yellow. He reached for the phone, its fractured screen catching the hollow glint in his eyes, then let it drop, the sound a faint echo in the silence of his defeat. Barron stepped away from the console, his pulse steady, his hands unshaken. The screens dimmed, the war room winding down as his team began to dismantle their stations, their task complete. He crossed to the penthouse window, Miami unfurling below in a tapestry of light and motion, its streets soon to gleam under the rain that had begun to fall. His reflection met him in the glass, a young man tempered by conflict, his legacy no longer a shadow of inheritance but a force etched into the digital frontier. He met Blade's fanaticism head-on, turned its fury into his own strength, and emerged not merely intact but ascendant, a prince claiming a throne built on his own terms. The world beyond the penthouse buzzed with the aftermath. Headlines raced to capture the Echo's demise, painting Barron as both prodigy and enigma, a gaming titan who dismantled a global threat with surgical grace. X ignited with chatter, some crowning him a savior, others wary of his reach. The donations from his record-breaking stream had ballooned into a fortune, his sponsors locking in their allegiance, the tournament trophy now a symbol of a night when chaos bowed to his will. Yet in the penthouse, it was the quiet that resonated, a kingdom secured, its ruler standing tall amidst the storm's gentle rhythm against the glass. In the basement, Blade rose, his movements heavy but deliberate. He lifted the flag, folding it with a care that belied his exhaustion, and tucked it into a drawer, a memento of a war he'd lost before the final blow. The monitor went black, its purpose extinguished, and he turned to the door, the hallway's faint light spilling in like a thread of possibility. He'd aimed to topple an empire, to pull a prince into the abyss, but instead he'd forged a legend. The fight was done, the echo muted, and Blade stepped into the night, a faded figure dissolving into a world that had already turned the page. The rain intensified, washing Miami's streets in a sheen of renewal as Barron stood alone in the penthouse. He shed his hoodie, letting it pool on the floor, and stretched, the city's heartbeat a distant hum beneath him. The war was won, the fanatic's reckoning delivered, but Barron understood the nature of empires. They thrived on vigilance, never truly at peace. For now, though, he claimed the stillness, a rare pause before the horizon inevitably called again. The story was his, the triumph undeniable, and the world would echo it as the day a prince rose to myth. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, that way you'll never miss our newest uploads.